Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, October 28th, 2016. Kind of like Groundhog Day, the Hillary Clinton email investigation, we're told by the FBI, has been reopened because some new evidence has surfaced. Now, for those of you who support Clinton for president, this is certainly quite inconvenient. The campaign had figured it had batted away the concerns about emails, first by getting the pass from James Comey in July that there would be no prosecution, and then by blaming Russia for the recent hack and leaks of the John Podesta emails. But in a letter sent to members of Congress on Friday, Too Tall James Comey, FBI director, cryptically said, "In connection with an unrelated case, the FBI has learned of the existence of emails that appear to be pertinent to the investigation. I'm writing to inform you that the investigative team briefed me on this yesterday, and I agreed that the FBI should take appropriate investigative steps designed to allow investigators to review these emails to determine whether they contain classified information, as well as to assess their importance to our investigation." And he added, although the FBI cannot yet assess whether or not this material may be significant, I cannot predict how long it will take to complete this additional work. I believe it is important to update your committees about our efforts in light of my previous testimony. Well, this is a stunner. It's a surprise. It's happening in October. I don't know if it is the October surprise. But it certainly gives a lot of fodder to the Republicans and the Trump campaign, as the polls have been tightening in the last few days in battleground states. And I have to raise only questions because there's such sketchy information available so far. When Comey refers to an unrelated case, what does that mean? Is the FBI investigating the John Podesta email hack? Are they investigating WikiLeaks? Are they investigating the claims that are so far unsubstantiated that Russia is responsible for the hacking and leaking to WikiLeaks? Well, that's one line of speculation. But what else could be an unrelated case? Well, that has me scratching my bald head right now. And we'll have to wait and see. But it's clearly predicted here that the FBI may not have any results between now and Election Day, which is only 11 days away as I speak to you. This also creates the potential that should Hillary Clinton be successful on Election Day, that the investigations will begin before she is even sworn in and may continue unabated, making it a real challenge for her to attempt to govern. And I can't help raising the questions about why the Democrats placed such a risky bet on Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders isn't perfect. There are many, many shortcomings that one can link to Bernie Sanders. But he doesn't carry this kind of political baggage. And so as we approach the end of this election cycle, it is still very much up in the air. I'm linking to a piece at The Intercept by Zaid Jilani, essentially telling the Democrats and the Clinton campaign to prove it or shut up. I'm referring to these far-fetched claims that they know that Russian hackers are responsible. And on Monday, I released I guess it was Tuesday, my interview with Bill Binney, a former top official at the NSA, who says, look, this is unproven nonsense. The NSA has the evidence to prove or disprove the claims about Russia if it wants to provide that. The Clinton campaign could call on the government to provide this evidence. But it's probably more productive to keep it unproven because they've snookered most of the media and most of the American public. So in Jelani's piece, he describes this strategy of blaming Russia, going back to a conference call with Democratic lawmakers in August. Politico reported that a number of Democratic strategists suggested that Russian hackers could sprinkle false data among the real information. And this has been a common thread. You can't trust that. When this 13-page memo from Doug Band was released yesterday, that is quite incriminating, about how Doug Band shook down corporate interests for money for the Clinton Foundation and at the same time set up lucrative consulting or speaking contracts for Bill Clinton, who walked away with millions and is projected to earn as much as $63 million from deals that are already in place over the next 9 years. And if Hillary were successful in winning a second term, Bill would be owing his wealth to corporate interests who would clearly have business before a Hillary Clinton administration. This is a kind of corruption and conflict of interest that is being wished away by blaming it on Russia and by falsely suggesting that these emails may have been doctored. Now, the one credible assertion that I have heard is from Brent Badowski, a man who I know, who has come pretty clean that, yeah, he was sending emails to John Podesta, and one that was exposed last week, he said, some of that language is stuff that I didn't write. I did write the email. Most of it is correct, but there are a couple of lines here that I don't believe are mine. This is the only case where somebody who's been somehow connected to the Podesta hacks has asserted with any credibility that an email might have been doctored or changed. Tim Kaine, the vice presidential candidate, has gotten in on the act. Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, deep in the tank with Hillary. She's a senior advisor to the David Brock Correct the Record super PAC. She told Jake Tapper on CNN there are reports that these have been doctored. And Newsweek had found, in fact, that this was happening. And that's not true. What Newsweek did is it incorrectly misreported. Well, that's a double. It incorrectly reported, let me clarify that the Russian news outlet Sputnik had made some mistakes in attribution that were later corrected. And over at PolitiFact, this article in The Intercept notes that they have been unable to verify that any of the emails is false, but they also can't prove, because, of course, the Clinton campaign hasn't provided any documentation that they are, in fact, legitimate. So this is the kind of environment where spin can succeed, where because you tell a lie often enough and loud enough, and because there isn't any direct refutation or contradiction, you can get away with it. And last night I was struck because I watched, as I usually do, the public television news hour. To their credit, they covered the Washington Post expose of the email that I was referring to with the memo from Doug Band enumerating the many ways that he has helped enrich Bill Clinton, his patron. And the PBS story ended with the expected denial from the campaign that was a little bit spun up. I wrote it down. They said you can't trust this document that was written by Doug Band and sent to John Podesta because it was the product of a hack by Russia and weaponized by WikiLeaks to influence the election. Then PBS ended its report, and in between stories, they put up a screen graphic telling you that there was a report that was on their website that was not going to be presented on the broadcast itself, with the headline that reads, Putin rejects claims of Russian interference in U.S. election. And I find this amazing, that they would at least tip off their audience that there is a report that Putin denies this, but they wouldn't share that report with the large audience watching the TV show. Instead, it is relegated to a handful of people who will actually go to the website and read that story. And that example of editorial bias, where PBS will be able to say, oh, well, we did report on Putin's denials, but they haven't given it nearly the exposure or the emphasis of the unproven spin that is being offered here domestically. And Putin's a former KGB guy. He may be lying through his teeth. I do acknowledge that it's possible that Russia has had an involvement. But there's no proof of this. But it's widely believed to be true. And as you know, I find this quite frustrating. And here's the second-day story in the New York Times today, which is mostly focused on the human interest side of Chelsea Clinton kind of flexing her muscles once she joined the foundation, trying to prevent embarrassment to her mommy and daddy. But they're not focusing on the corruption that these deals that Doug Band set up to make Bill Clinton earn millions of dollars in the past, in the present, and going into the future by selling his influence as a former president and as the husband of a presumed next president to corporate interests. And that shows that the corporate media is downplaying this story. They're going along with the spin from the Clinton campaign that we shouldn't look at this because it's tainted by Russia. And I find it troubling and quite embarrassing to the media, which I guess I'm a part of. Now, here's some courage. I mentioned that I watched the public television news hour. Their expert reporter who covers the Supreme Court is a woman I have deep respect for. Her name is Marcia Coyle, and she works for the obscure publication called the National Law Journal. And it is a staid and studiously nonpartisan outlet that always covers both sides of a Supreme Court case. And I've never seen a hint of bias or sensationalism exhibited by Marcia Coyle. And indeed, when she appeared on the NewsHour last night, she seemed extremely uncomfortable, as she reported in the same even-handed and unemotional way that I've seen her cover Supreme Court cases. The story and the allegations of one Moira Smith. She's now a lawyer who lives in Alaska, but in 1999 she was a law student. She was 23 years old, and she attended a dinner party at the home of her boss, where Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was the honored guest. And she says that as a result of all this publicity of Trump groping, maybe some of the publicity of the countercharges about Bill Clinton's sexual exploits, that she decided to go public with this story that is 17 years old. She said, I've got a daughter, and before last weekend, I had subconsciously convinced myself that she would never go through this, and now I know she almost certainly will. I'm responsible to help minimize the risks and help her to understand what to do if she does, and to model the behavior that it's not okay. What she says is that while she was at her boss's home in Virginia, setting the table for this gourmet dinner with Justice Thomas, that the two of them were alone in the dining room, and he reached over and grabbed her butt. And he grabbed it, and he squeezed it, and then he said, "Where are you sitting?" And he suggested that she should sit right next to him. Now, as you may know, not everybody does, I was there for the confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas as a Supreme Court justice. It was really ugly, because the white male Democrats who wanted to block his confirmation had their own sexual skeletons in the closet, like Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. And they were afraid because George H.W. Bush had appointed this black conservative that if they rejected him, they would be viewed as racist. And so when Anita Hill surfaced, they exploited her testimony, tried to kill the confirmation of Justice Thomas, which he referred to as a high-tech lynching, and he was able to spin his way out of that. This new charge, which has been denied by Justice Thomas, the most taciturn member of the Supreme Court, he issued a one-line statement that could have been written by Donald Trump. This claim is preposterous, and it never happened. End of quote. To its credit, the New York Times reported on this, but buried it deep in the newspaper today. And we'll see if there is any further coverage, and also if other women surface who have similar claims against Clarence Thomas. And this whole wave of women coming forward to explain inappropriate sexual behavior that they've been subjected to over many years, I think is an important moment. I have some concerns that it could lead to a kind of public judgment and vigilante justice. But, for example, in Madison, Wisconsin, female students have gone public to share their stories of being sexually assaulted by a student who's a senior at the University of Wisconsin. The suspect is identified as Alec Cook. He's charged with 14 felonies and 1 misdemeanor. A woman said after meeting him in a psychology class and chatting on Facebook, she went to his apartment where he grabbed her hair and forced her to perform oral sex and then raped her. Another said that she was invited to his apartment where he raped her and choked her until her vision blurred. And there are other stories that are similar. And I think that this is important, that women are finding their voices and overcoming the institutional barriers, the shame and humiliation that can accompany disclosures of this sort. And over at Penn State, the man we now know as a filmmaker, Nate Parker, who was on the wrestling team, accused of rape back in 1999, he is not the subject of a new investigation, but members of the faculty and the athletic department are being accused of, bad behavior and covering it up and helping to facilitate what ended up as charges being acquitted in a trial of Nate Parker. And I don't presume to know what really happened. I'm not trying to demonize Nate Parker. But I think it's important not to bury these events, these incidents, and the damage that it causes to the victims. And speaking of victims, I've long followed the case of Abu Zubaydah. And Jason Leopold, my friend and colleague who now works at Vice News, published a report yesterday indicating that a parole board review of the case of Abu Zubaydah this summer has led to the conclusion that he will be held forever at Guantanamo and never charged or tried. And as Leopold describes him, Abu Zubaydah was the first war on terror captive and the guinea pig for the CIA's torture program. They're saying that he's too dangerous to release. And I think the danger is that he knows too much about the torture program because he's the only one, we're told, who received all 10 of the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. Now, the so-called Periodic Review Board said its ruling is based on Abu Zubaydah's past involvement in terrorist activity, including, probably, they say, serving as one of Osama bin Laden's most trusted facilitators and his admitted abilities as a long-term facilitator and fundraiser for extremist causes. Brent Mickham, the attorney who I have interviewed before, says we always expected that it would always come down exactly as it has. We never believed that he had a chance. He was picked up in Pakistan in March of 2002. They sent him to a black site prison in Thailand where he was waterboarded. Then he ultimately was sent to Guantanamo. We believe he was held at other locations in between. Back in 2014, in the Senate Intelligence Committee's torture report, a memo surfaced where CIA interrogators asked for, quote, reasonable assurances that Abu Zubaydah would remain in isolation and incommunicado for the remainder of his life, unless he died during interrogation. Now, he did lose an eye, and nobody has ever explained. They claim it was due to a pre-existing condition, but his left eye is gone, and he wears a patch in its place. So this is part of the very ugly chapter of America's dark side dalliance into torture and barbarism. No one has been held accountable for it. Oh, I forgot. John Kiriakou, the CIA officer who acknowledged that we had a torture program but didn't torture anybody, he spent almost 3 years in prison for that. But Alfreda Francis Bukowski, who remains a top CIA officer, who was identified as the one who micromanaged torture sessions and believed to include Abu Zubaydah and others. She's the redhead who was depicted by the movie star whose name I can't remember in the propaganda film Zero Dark 30. To this day, the CIA maintains her identity as a secret. I call bullshit. And she is one of the identified individuals who should be charged and tried for the execution of the torture program. The architects of it should face the same accountability. Today I'm releasing a special podcast for my subscribers, a tribute to Tom Hayden, an American revolutionary. I got to know Tom during the last 25 years as he was a legislator in California. He ran for governor in 1994, and that's when we got to know each other quite well. And I interviewed him many times over the years, and this week I spent time going back over the archived interviews, and I pulled clips from 3 or 4 of them that I have included in this podcast tribute. Here's an excerpt from my podcast tribute to the late Tom Hayden.
It's all a fraud. It's all manufactured to mesmerize Americans to lose their tax money, lose their senses, and never get around to dealing with this country's internal domestic problems like health care. And it works. It's the same as law enforcement. You always hear more about the war on gangs, the war on drugs, the war on crime. We have more people in prison in California than anywhere. This country has more people in prison than anywhere in the world. And we still have inner-city problems, violence, crime. There's no connection between the policing philosophy and the reality, except it's perfect politics from Los Angeles, South Central, to Iraq, to Georgia. It's one issue.
And as I mentioned, the Tom Hayden tribute is available today for subscribers at peterbcollins.com. Tune in, iTunes, and all of our outlets. And my work is made possible because of people like you, people like Pauline Nixon. She's a monthly subscriber who does more than the minimum. And then there are folks like Amy Annette, Hillary Hamilton, and the folks at Perry Productions, who just renewed their annual subscriptions in the last week or so. I'm very grateful for this support, and I need more people to sign up and make this system work. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the link that says Become a Subscriber. That's under the menu tab. Takes you to the sign-up page. It's very easy, and I will appreciate whatever support you can offer. We've been covering with interest the North Dakota pipeline protests at Standing Rock. And yesterday things heated up as the water protectors were occupying land claimed to be owned by the pipeline construction company. It led to as many as 141 arrests. And it got ugly at points. Now, officials claim that activists set pipeline equipment on fire, erected illegal and dangerous roadblocks. They forced police to close in on the demonstration, deploy pepper spray, and arrest activists who failed to comply with orders. But the activists tell a very different story, that they have maintained a peaceful posture, She said, here is a quote from Rose Stiffarm. I love that name. She's a member of 6 Native American nations that include the Chippewa Cree, who are all protesting there. She said the government is attacking us for protesting, for protecting the water. She said police were deploying tear gas, which the sheriff denied, and said that they were targeting the press. Dean Dedman, a member of the Standing Rock Hunkpapa tribe from South Dakota, told the Guardian newspaper, everybody is still standing strong. We're still holding the lands. And he's been there for months. He's the one who has his own drone. And we learned that they have now imposed a no-fly zone over the area around Standing Rock. I don't know if Hillary Clinton recommended that. She has called for one in Syria, but I don't know about Standing Rock. We're also learning that cell phone traffic is being jammed at the site. And in addition to pepper spray and stun guns used in the arrests last night, law enforcement used rubber bullets and a sound cannon, which can cause permanent hearing damage when it's deployed at close range. We also understand that out there in the land where the buffalo roam, that some protesters on horseback were able to herd a group of buffalo and stampeded them toward the police. Now, I think that's a very interesting and organic kind of tactic. I'm not sure how it fits in with breaking the law. So I want to recommend to you a story that I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast, written by our friend Steve Horn at DeSmog Blog. And he notes that it was 20 years ago when a president named Bill Clinton signed a law that was not controversial. It created an interstate agreement for emergency management after disasters. It is called EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And under the law, it is intended to be used for natural disasters. But in the fine print of the law, it says that while it centers around natural disaster relief, the joint resolution notes that it exists to help manage things like community disorders, insurgency, or an enemy attack. I'm not sure which would apply to the Standing Rock protesters. And it's a stretch to claim that these are disorders or an insurgency when these are largely First Amendment protests, peaceful protests. So I commend Steve Horn for digging up this law. He reports that a number of states have sent mutual aid to North Dakota. And let's see the list here. They include Wisconsin, Indiana, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And Horn is able to confirm that the water protectors have had local cell phone communications jammed and possibly recorded. That comes from a statement by the National Lawyers Guild. Now, a standoff of very different dimensions occurred last January in Oregon at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. And I must say that I'm pretty shocked that the jury in Portland, Oregon, acquitted all 7 of the defendants, including Ammon Bundy and his brother Ryan. Now, the charges were a little bit weak. It was conspiring to impede federal workers from their jobs. I don't know why they didn't use trespassing or, loitering or something like that with some sort of an enhancement for being heavily armed. But I honor the verdicts of juries. I wasn't there for the trial. There was some coverage of it that I saw, but I think this comes as a surprise to all. One of the defense attorneys, Robert Salisbury, said, "It's stunning. It's a stunning victory for the defense. I'm speechless." And the lawyer for Ammon Bundy went a little ballistic in the courtroom and had to be subdued by U.S. Marshals because he kept shouting, demanding that the judge immediately release Ammon Bundy. But she said she can't because he faces charges for the Nevada standoff at his dad's ranch 2 years ago. So apparently he will remain in custody for those charges unless they allow him to post bail. And I hope there's deeper coverage of this trial that we can catch up with in the next few days. But as it stands, I am quite surprised at that outcome. Interesting juxtaposition of reporting on the front page of Friday's New York Times. In the upper left corner is the story from Portland. Court acquits all defendants in land takeover. Blow to government. A claim of overreach appeared to sway the jury. And in the very next news column, the headline reads, Trump backers see revolution if Clinton wins. And some of them say that they will take up arms, kind of on the model of the Bundy père et fils. And I am very concerned that Donald Trump has so poisoned the political climate in this country that really no matter who wins, we're going to have a very divided country for some time to come. And we're going to be paying a price for the Trump virus and the Trump circus that we have endured this year. For a long time, I've been saying highly critical things about Tom Wheeler. President Obama appointed him the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, an agency I know a lot about because I worked in the radio business regulated by the FCC for most of what passes for my career. And I've been critical of Tom Wheeler because he's an industry guy. He came out of the cable TV and wireless telephone industries. He was their lobbyist for each of those respective groups. And so it is with some surprise that I say something nice about Tom Wheeler. Yesterday, he announced new privacy rules adopted by the FCC that require the Internet providers, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, to get permission from you or me before they can collect our data on web browsing, the apps that we use, our location, and our financial information. Currently, those broadband providers can track users unless the individuals tell them to stop, and we don't have a mechanism to do that. So, I applaud this. But aren't they trying to rein in only one sector of the data collectors? Because Google and Facebook, for example, are not regulated by the FCC. And so they're not bound by this rule, and they can continue to collect our browsing history and then send us ads that match the browsing that we've been doing. And so, again, I think that this is a minor victory for our privacy. It limits invasion for commercial purposes by one sector of the Internet business community, but it is by far just a partial approach. And finally today, it appears that Tuesday, the jury in the New Jersey Bridgegate case will get the case against two former aides of Chris Christie. And it's been exposed at this trial that Chris Christie knew during the closure of the lanes at the George Washington Bridge that his political appointees had done this. There's evidence presented at the trial that a text that was sent by Bridget Kelly, his former deputy chief of staff and one of the people charged, sent an email saying that during a press conference, it was a text message, he just flat out lied. And we know Chris Christie lied about this. What remains to be seen is if he will be facing any charges for being a big, fat liar. Thanks for joining me for News and Comment. This free podcast is available every day on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.